Have you ever stood in the grocery store parking lot, looked down at that long receipt, and felt your stomach tighten? If so, you are definitely not alone. Right now, many average families are spending close to $1,000 every month just to keep food on the table. That adds up to about $12,000 a year. But here is the part most people never think about. If you have even one single acre of land, you may already be standing on a resource that could permanently replace a large part of that food bill. Welcome back to Farmyard Care. Today we are not chasing homesteading fantasies. We are talking about real practical resilience. A lot of advice makes it sound simple. Plant a garden, buy a few chickens, put some fruit trees around the yard, and suddenly the grocery store becomes optional. But after years of working around gardens, livestock, poultry, and small farms, I can tell you clearly that idea is not reality. A homestead that truly saves money is not built by scattering projects everywhere. It is built by design. The difference between land that feeds your family and land that drains your money, time, and energy comes down to one powerful word: layout. Many hard-working homesteaders fail not because they lack effort, but because they set up their land without a working plan. They walk too far, move too much feed, waste too much manure, and spend every weekend fixing problems that good design could have prevented. But when the layout is right, 1 acre can become a connected, living system where the garden, animals, trees, compost, and water all support each other. In this video, we are walking through the blueprint: 1 acre, 5 zones, a year-round food network. By the end, you will understand how to design a small farm system that works with you instead of forcing you to work against it. If you are ready to take food independence seriously, let's get started. Part 1. The broken food system and the power of permaculture design. Let's begin with a number that should make any family pause for a moment. The USDA follows the cost of feeding a family of 4, and even on the lowest cost plan, that bill can reach close to $1,000 a month. That is not a small household expense. And the harder truth is this: the food system we depend on is becoming more fragile every year. We have all seen egg prices shoot up when avian flu hits poultry farms. We have seen beef prices climb as cattle herds shrink. Every year you delay producing even part of your own food, the distance grows between what you are forced to buy and what you could be raising, growing, and harvesting at home. But after years of working around gardens, poultry, livestock systems, and small farms, I can tell you one lesson matters more than almost anything else. Layout controls labor, fertility, and yield. Every extra step between your kitchen and your garden becomes a step you repeat again and again. Over months and years, that turns into real exhaustion. And if your animals are placed too far from your growing areas, their manure becomes a chore to clean up instead of a valuable fertilizer that should be feeding your soil. This is why permaculture design is so powerful on small properties. For decades, good designers have arranged land into zones based on how often each area is used and how much attention it needs. The things you touch every single day should be closest to the house. The things you check weekly can sit a little farther out, and the edges of the property should quietly perform the background work that supports the whole farm. Now let's walk through these 5 zones and see how they connect into one working system. Part 2. Water, the mainframe priority. Before we plant one seed, set one post, or build one fence, we need to answer the question that keeps every farm alive. Where will the water go, and how will we keep it on the land? A strong homestead is not built only around irrigation, it is built around retention. In permaculture, water is treated as the main priority. Water first, access second, structures third. The goal is simple: slow down, spread out, and sink as much rainfall as possible before it leaves your property. A basic contour swale, which is a shallow level trench following the natural shape of the land, can catch runoff and let it soak gradually into the soil instead of rushing away. Done correctly, this one feature can reduce irrigation needs by 40 to 60%. And if you add a small pond, even one around 500 to 1,000 square feet, you change the entire feel of the property. A pond stores water for dry periods, softens summer heat, supports wildlife, and can even provide 50 to 100 pounds of protein a year when stocked with fish such as tilapia. Water is the lifeblood of a farm. Get water right, and your land becomes far more forgiving in almost every other area. Part 3. Zone 1. The intensive core. Picture yourself stepping out of the kitchen door. Within about 30 feet, you should enter Zone 1. This is the daily harvest zone, the part of the homestead you use constantly. In household food production, one truth shows up again and again. The closer food is to the kitchen, the more likely it is to be harvested and eaten. If your salad greens are 200 feet away, there will be plenty of busy evenings when you skip the walk and reach for something processed instead. Proximity creates productivity. Zone 1 is the right place for culinary herbs, salad greens, green onions, cherry tomatoes, and other crops you reach for often. It does not need to be huge. A space of 200 to 400 square feet can produce a surprising amount when it is managed intensively. John Jeavons, known for biointensive gardening, showed that double-dug, closely planted beds can produce impressive yields, including hundreds of pounds of cucumbers or carrots from just 100 square feet. But this is also where many gardeners lose momentum. They plant lettuce in April, harvest it in June, and then the bed sits empty for months. That is not a food system. That is a seasonal hobby. The real key to Zone 1 is succession planting. You sow a fresh row of fast-growing greens every 10 days, so when one planting finishes, the next one is already coming in. And the system should not stop when cold weather arrives. With simple unheated hoop houses and cold frames, crops like spinach, kale, and carrots can hold through winter in a slow, protected state. Carrots are especially rewarding because they concentrate sugars to protect themselves from freezing, which is why they often taste much sweeter after a frost. Part 4, Zone 2, the food forest. As we move a little farther out from the house, we step into Zone 2, the food forest. Annual vegetables are important, but they cannot carry the whole food system by themselves. They need replanting, watering, protecting, and constant attention. A food forest is different. When it is designed well, it becomes one of the closest things to long-term, low-maintenance food you can build on a small homestead. Instead of planting fruit trees in rows with bare soil underneath, we stack the system in layers. At the top, you have larger fruit trees. Beneath them, smaller trees like figs and mulberries. Under those, you add berry bushes, and at ground level, you use living covers such as strawberries. Each layer has a job. The shade protects the soil, the ground covers hold moisture, the shrubs fill empty space, and the trees produce year after year. When these layers work together, the whole area needs less water and no synthetic fertilizer. A standard apple tree can produce up to 800 pounds of fruit in a good year. But one tree many homesteaders overlook is the mulberry. A mature mulberry can drop so much fruit during its season that it may replace up to 2/3 of your chicken feed for that window of time. That is not just fruit, that is free, nutrient-rich animal feed falling right where your flock can use it. Add high-bush blueberries that can stay productive for 50 years, along with elderberries for natural wellness uses, and you have a zone that feeds both your family and your animals for decades. You plant it once, maintain it lightly, and let the system keep paying you back. Part 5. Zone 3. The livestock hub. Fruits and vegetables are valuable, but a serious homestead also needs protein. That brings us to Zone 3, the livestock hub. This is where animals and plants begin working together. And from years of watching small farms succeed or fail, I can tell you this connection is where the real power of the system appears. On a 1-acre homestead, 6 to 15 hens is usually the ideal range. It is enough to supply eggs, manure, pest control, and activity without overwhelming the land. But be careful with your breed choices. Do not depend only on high-output hybrid birds designed for confinement systems, because many of them burn out quickly. Choose hardy, pasture-performing heritage breeds such as Black Australorps or Rhode Island Reds. In 2026, the value of chickens is not just in the egg basket. 6 hens can produce around 780 pounds of manure in a year. If their coop is placed near your compost and food forest, that manure becomes a resource instead of a cleanup problem. The chickens eat fallen and bruised fruit, their manure feeds the compost feeds the trees, and the trees drop more fruit. That is how a real closed loop begins. And rabbits deserve a place in this conversation too. They are one of the most overlooked meat animals for a small farm. A breeding trio can produce up to 300 pounds of dressed meat a year in a very small footprint. Even better, rabbit manure is considered cold manure, which means it can go directly onto garden beds without composting first and without burning plants. Place a worm bin under the rabbit hutches, and the system becomes even stronger. Manure drops down, worms turn it into rich castings, and extra worms become high-protein treats for the chickens. Nothing is wasted when every part is connected. Part 6. Zone 4, the fodder strip and windbreaks. Now we move to the outer ring, Zone 4. On many properties, this area is wasted as mowed grass, messy fence lines, or unused edges. But on a well-designed 1-acre homestead, the perimeter should not sit idle. It should protect the farm, feed the animals, and build fertility at the same time. This is where a dedicated fodder strip becomes extremely useful. Done right, it can help reduce your animal feed bill by 20 to 30%. One of the strongest plants for this job is Bocking 14 comfrey. This sterile hybrid can be cut 4 to 7 times a year, and a single plant can produce up to 30 pounds of biomass. Its deep roots pull minerals from below the soil surface. and its dried leaves can reach around 26% protein, which puts it in the same conversation as alfalfa. You can feed comfrey to chickens and rabbits in sensible amounts, or cut it and drop it around fruit trees as free fertilizer. Then you can add nitrogen-fixing trees like black locust, which can fix up to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, while also providing rot-resistant fence posts, an excellent forage for bees. Living windbreaks can also increase crop yields by reducing environmental stress, with some studies showing gains up to 44%. So your outer edge is not just a boundary. It becomes a working shield that feeds animals, protects crops, builds soil, and costs very little to establish. Part 7. Zone 5, the Wild Observer and Pollinator Corridor. In traditional permaculture, Zone 5 is the wild area, the place you do not constantly manage, cut, clean, or control. You leave it mostly to nature so you can observe what the land is trying to do on its own. On a 1-acre homestead, that does not mean you need a forest. It can simply mean keeping a small pocket of native plants, grasses, shrubs, and habitat where beneficial insects can live. Those predatory insects become your quiet pest control team, helping manage problems in the garden without relying on pesticides. This zone is also one of the best places to support bees. Honeybees can multiply the value of everything else you are growing. If you place them near the border between the food forest and the garden, they can move easily across your vegetables, berries, fruit trees, and flowering plants. Beekeeping is not easy right now, especially with winter colony losses being so high, so it is wise to plan carefully and consider keeping at least 2 hives instead of depending on one. But the reward can be tremendous. Well-pollinated crops can produce 30 to 50% more food. That means more tomatoes, more squash, more berries, and stronger fruit set across the whole property. Sometimes the smallest workers on the farm create some of the biggest results, simply because you gave them a safe place to live and work. Part 8, the ultimate bridge, preservation and patience now. Imagine your 5 zones are working. The garden is producing, the food forest is filling in, the animals are feeding the soil, and your land is giving you more food than you expected. This is where many homesteads still fall short. They do not build a bridge between summer abundance and winter eating. You can grow baskets of tomatoes in August and still be buying too much food in February if you do not have a way to store the harvest. That is why every serious homestead needs a preservation area and a preservation plan. You need a reliable pressure canner for low-acid vegetables and meats. You need a dehydrator so fruits, herbs, vegetables, and other foods can become shelf-stable for years. You need some form of root storage, even something as simple as burying a galvanized trash can properly to hold around 60 pounds of potatoes through March for very little money. And one of the most valuable tools is fermentation. Fermentation does not require electricity, and it can actually increase the nutrition of your food by creating B vitamins. It turns simple harvests into foods that store well, support digestion, and add variety through the cold months. With a real preservation strategy, your 1-acre system does not just feed you during the growing season. It helps put food on your table all year. But there is one final warning I want every new homesteader to take seriously. The biggest reason many homesteads fail is not poor soil, and it is not always lack of money. It is trying to build everything at the same time. Do not try to create all 5 zones in your first spring. Start with Zone 1, your kitchen garden, and add a small flock of chickens. Learn how your land drains, where the wind hits, where the sun lasts longest, and how much time you can honestly give each day. Then add 1 new zone per season. Build slowly, but build correctly. Within 4 to 5 years, the system begins to compound like interest. The trees grow stronger, the soil gets richer, the animals become part of the cycle, and the work starts to support itself. Conclusion: 1 acre, designed with intention, will not make you completely self-sufficient in every single thing. You will probably still buy coffee, salt, cooking oil, and other staples. But it can give you something the grocery store never will. It can give you eggs with deep orange yolks, tomatoes that taste like real tomatoes, carrots that turn sweeter after surviving frost, and food that came from soil you cared for with your own hands. More than that, it gives you peace of mind. When the next supply chain disruption happens, or the next frightening price spike hits the news, you are no longer standing at the register feeling helpless. You have food growing outside. You have animals producing. You have soil improving. You have a system that reduces your dependence 1 season at a time. A 1-acre homestead is not just a collection of separate projects. It should be one living network, and the layout is the operating system that keeps it running. The garden feeds the kitchen. The animals feed the compost feeds the trees feed the animals. Nothing is truly wasted when every output becomes a resource for the next part of the farm. So here is the question. Which zone are you most excited to build first? Share it in the comments below. If this helped you understand how a real small farm system can work, hit the like button, subscribe to Farmyard Care, and share this with someone who dreams of a simpler, more resilient life. The person who chooses one zone and starts today is already far ahead of the person still waiting for perfect conditions. Get your hands in the dirt, and let's keep building.